Nick,
Hi.
thank you for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
Tell me, who is Nick Hamilton?
Um, Nick Hamilton is a British racing driver, author, and general hopeful inspiration to a lot of people born with cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia, and just trying to live my life in the best way that I can.
Amazing, what a purpose. We're aligned by a mutual interest in motorsport. I
Mhm.
was brought up in a family that were always watching the Grand Prix at the weekend. Clearly you were too.
Yep.
I wanted to go back to that sort of early sort of thought process you had of your own desires, your own ambitions to get into motorsport, and we'll bring that right forward to what you're doing now.
Motorsport runs in my family, obviously being related to Lewis, and so we started, from a one-bedroom flat as a family. Found motorsport. My brother obviously loved it, and my dad really focused on trying to, get him to where he is today, and we collectively worked as a family to get him where he is today. And I think it was just natural for me to fall in love with motorsport because I eat, slept, and breathed it. I was always there at every race, in my wheelchair or my walking frame or whatever it was. And I always wanted to have a shot or a go at go-karts, but never thought I could because of my disability. And that's where the love for it started. But because I didn't get the shot as a young kid, I just sat on the sidelines watching Lewis and trying to support him as much as I could, but still had that love and that passion for motorsport. Yeah.
As we sit here now, you'll be competing at Brands Hatch in the British Touring Car Championship in a few days' time.
Yeah.
So from the kid that was not able to get into a go-kart and not able to kind of pursue your dream to now be racing, what's the journey been there? And what barriers have you broken that, dare I say, have opened up opportunity for others coming through from a disability point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. If you look at little baby Nick at 2 years old, I think looking at me now, I think he wouldn't realize, where I've come from. And it's been a terrible and difficult journey, I would say, as well as it being a very fruitful and positive one. Obviously, with my disability, things were very hard for me to overcome. I didn't really know who I was as a young kid. When I was born and diagnosed with the condition, my parents knew nothing about it. So they didn't really know the best route, like a lot of parents do. They seem to struggle to start with, and then it's all about trial and tribulation of trial and error of figuring out what they can and what they can't do. And so I got to a point where I started to walk or tried to walk, but was struggling physically. And because of the tightness and the spasticity of my muscles, I couldn't walk long distances, and I was falling over all the time, and I was hitting my head, and I was just hurting myself generally. And so, going into general schooling was tough. I didn't go to school with, disabled individuals. I was the only disabled person at school. So when I was like 8 years old, I'd never seen another disabled person. So I felt like I was the only disabled person in the world at this point. So I was really struggling for purpose, struggling physically to overcome the disability. I was segregated a lot by a lot of people. All my friends are outside playing tag or whatever it was at lunchtime and break time, and I'm trying to understand this condition, doing physiotherapy and all that sort of stuff. So I was in a really dark spot. And then over time, I got older and older, got bullied more, and realized it was because I was in this wheelchair that I chose to be in. It was my choice, and it was going to help me throughout my teenage years where I didn't have to walk at all, to go out with my friends or to just do stuff at school. So that was a good choice for me. But as I got older, um, I personally believe I became quite lazy. Um, there's a lot of people that see wheelchairs as, empowering, and positive and powerful. But unfortunately, in my life, it became a negative where people overlooked me, didn't give me the right opportunities. And so I made a decision myself at 16 to basically get out my wheelchair and learn to walk. And so it was tough, it was hard, and I won't go into detail, but I
You'd
did
been
what I could.
told you weren't able to walk as well, right? You'd actually been ultimately said that's not something you were actually able to do, or
Yeah, I
did you
think.
just decided to override that and I'm going to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in the initial diagnosis was that it'd be highly unlikely I'd ever walk, and if I was, it would be at best with some sort of like stick. or aid. But my parents, they never take no for an answer, and they pushed me from a really early age, and it gave me that strength and determination to start with. Yes, I was in a wheelchair, but I looked internally and was like, Nick, if you want to do something that you think is positive in your life, and you don't want people to overlook you all the time, because this was back in the you know late 90s as well, where I don't think a lot of people were getting the help that they needed. They couldn't really be outspoken, and so I had to find it internally to pull myself out, and I did. And then I just started walking longer distances, and I did all the things I did as a kid at 16. Where I was falling over, hitting my head, all that sort of stuff. And then I found my passion for motorsport and asked my dad if he'd ever put me in a real race car, and he did when I was 17. But when I drove it, I was actually quite fast. I was, the same speed as the chief instructor on my first day, which was great, at a BMW M3. But physically, I was struggling with my legs. So then I had to go to the gym. So I started going to the gym and working on my legs physically. And it just built my strength for a race car, but it completely changed my life, because it meant that I could now travel to London or go out with my friends and not worry about struggling for physical, strength.
I'm feeling so much resilience then. That's almost like, I've used this expression before, like a cork out of the bottle. That suppression you had as a youngster, not being able, watching from the sidelines, having your own dreams, to then take ownership of, okay, I'm going to get out of this wheelchair and I'm going to walk with, which is so lovely to hear, encouragement from from your parents, from your family,
Of course.
to make that happen, to then ultimately go through these challenges, which you actually described as terrible. But you're smiling. You've come through, and you're actually achieving these incredible milestones now, competing, at the weekend in the race.
Yep.
That resilience. There's a physical element. You realise you needed to get fit and build your strength up. How important is mindset?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely everything. The hardest thing when you talk about mental health is I think, from my experience, a lot of people roll their eyes at you when you say, I'm struggling mentally or whatever. And I think the most powerful thing you can do is accept that you're struggling mentally. Is the first step. I think it's the best step you can make. Then the second step is to ask for help and go and find the correct help from people, whether that's professionals or friends or family. And for me, I think I was with a disability. It's a very lonely and solitary spot, because no one in my family had a disability. Everyone that I was around was all able-bodied, and it was just me. And it was great that my mum was like, yeah, Nick, you can do this, you can do that. Why don't you do this? Why don't you try this? You'll be okay at school. Where it was only me that really had the disability. And I know my mum would do everything she could for me, but it was only me that actually could get up and try and walk, or try and overcome an obstacle that's really, quite difficult, but really simple for able-bodied people to overcome. And then as time went on, I started looking for help in therapy, because my parents are very old-fashioned, and they taught me a way of being like, you don't need to speak to anybody, you don't need anybody, you're strong enough on your own.
That's old school protection,
Old
though,
school.
isn't it?
Old school.
Coming from the right place.
Yeah, it was all positive. It was absolutely all positive stuff. But for me, it was like, no, I actually need some sort of help and guidance.
It's great you recognise that.
I did, absolutely, and that's what I chose to do. And I've been in and out of therapy for like 10 years, trying to find the best therapist or the best technique or whatever it is. And yeah, I just found different methods, different people along the way, and really learning to understand myself more and more just helped me mentally. And it just builds my strength. But also, I'm keen in saying that although I seem like I'm this beacon of light that's overcome a condition and is really strong and is overcoming loads of things, I'm super vulnerable and fragile like everybody else. And working on your mentality to try and stay as strong as possible is super important.
So many powerful messages there. You're coming at it from a point of view of disability, but that being the best version of yourself. And again, going back to the grid this weekend, there's no one on that grid that wants it more than you. There's and
Absolutely.
no one's going to argue with that, right? There's no one that's
Absolutely.
come through a journey
Mm.
to get onto that grid quite like yours, which is an interesting concept of competition, because all your peers on the grid would accept that, and yet they're all there to win.
Of course.
The support side of things, going back to that therapy, there's an element of parents, and I can relate to that. I'm dad to 2 daughters, and you're often trying to fix. You're trying to just take me through that sort of therapy journey to where you've got to, because it feels like at no time in your life have you had sort of more clearly maturity, but perspective and almost a comfort and contentment without any arrogance, because you're still on a journey.
Absolutely.
But was there a moment through the therapy where you really recognized that there was a huge amount of help there and sort of perspective that ultimately gave you an opportunity to grow more as a person?
As a kid, I think I was lost with my disability. And I got a lot of stick a couple of years ago when I was on Loose Women, and I was talking about my story with disability, and I didn't want to upset disabled people, but I managed to, which was really tough. And I don't want to do the same again in this type of interview. But I'm just talking from my own perspective, and that's how I saw disability. And at the time, I didn't have a good relationship with it, and I really struggled to understand it. The more I went through my life with my disability, the more I sat with it, and the more I learned that it's okay to have these really difficult and troubled days physically, and that not every day is an amazing day, and the next day could be better, and if it's not, that's okay. But then that's just disability. Put that to one side. I was trying to find where I was going to go in my life. My brother was a very successful, able-bodied athlete. My dad was a very successful businessman, and I was a disabled man who was struggling with his identity. And to be perceived by able-bodied people in the way that you would like to be as a disabled person is quite difficult. And so I was struggling for where I was going for in my life, in terms of career, and motorsport was very important to me, but it's very hard to continuously raise the money and the funds to be on the grid and all that sort of stuff. So I went through a real dark patch. I went through a gambling addiction, and I just went through like the darkest times of my life where, I preferred to be asleep than awake almost. My flat was an absolute tip. I just didn't understand where I was at. And that's where I really started to notice the power of mental health and the power of psychology, and therapy. So that's when I started reaching out to people, to professionals. And then as I almost recovered from my traumas, from bad times in life through therapy, I then found my purpose. And I believe my purpose is to be a disabled person, here in service of others, and use my voice and my story to try and inspire other people. And I do that through learning more and more about myself, and I do that through therapy. And so I'm here, and I'm completely open, and I'm completely authentic, and I'm not going to shy away from difficult questions. I'm going to sit here and say I'm nowhere near perfect, and I'm happy that I'm not. And I struggle just like everybody else, and I'm not 100% amazing. I've just done what I can with what I have, and I'm trying to do it in the best way that I can, but also by being decent and genuine, and trying to take people on the journey at the same time.
So much strength in your vulnerability there. In a world where young lads are really struggling with role models, and it's been heightened with the adolescence documentary, and also, there's just so much strength in what you said there. There's also a huge amount of fight for independence, and you open your own opportunities. You got out of that wheelchair and you walked to be doing the things you do now. We met through a mutual friend and business contact who introduced me on the basis of that he's supporting your sponsorship for racing. On your own back. You took yourself to an event. You ultimately presented the opportunity. You impressed him enough to want to back you to be part of the. That's all on you. And the reason why I say that is because you could potentially go through your father, your brother, or leverage kind of the family side, but you've not chosen to do that at all. You're doing that on your own.
Yeah, and I always have done. I gave for the first year or so, when I started in 2011. You know, my dad helped me with sponsorship. You know, and we got partners that were part of McLaren F1 team or whatever it was. But my dad has always taught me to graft and grind and get everything yourself and work for it yourself. And yes, my dad could have helped me, and he could have made a couple of phone calls to maybe get a bit of sponsorship over the line, but he didn't. And I guess as a kid, I resented him for it slightly, because I was like, why can't you just make things a little bit easier? But it was the same with my disability. My dad wouldn't help me up the step. You know, I'd have to find my own way to get up there.
You wouldn't change it now, though, would you?
Absolutely, and you wouldn't change it now. So, you know, I'm constantly, constantly trying to evolve in where I want to be in my career, and my motorsport is a very, very important part of that. You know, finding the sponsorship is very, very difficult, and the majority of people, you know, think because of who I am and who I'm related to with Lewis, you know, he's just going to pay for everything, and away I go, and it's all a bed of roses. But I would never accept Lewis's, you know, offers to help me, because, you know, I'm a man in my own right, and I work for everything myself. I get my laptop like every other driver, and, you know, go to events and meet people, and yeah, not necessarily sell myself, but just be a decent person with a goal and a passion, and hopefully people, you know, back me, not because I sit and win races, because unfortunately I actually, you know, I don't necessarily win races, but, you know, being the only disabled athlete in the pinnacle of British motorsport, um, in therapy, I realized, you know, I'm doing pretty well, and I'm winning at life, really, from where I was to where I am now. And yeah, it doesn't matter whether I come first or last. I'm a champion in my own right, and that's what I go into when I go into meetings, and
It's a great
hopefully
mindset.
get the right thing.
I love hearing that from you. I was going to say that to you,
Thank
heartfelt.
you, thank you.
But on those goals, aspirations, drive, is there a North Star? Because it feels like this is a journey that you're
Yep.
embracing and others are embracing to be part of. But is there something that you'd love to achieve in motorsport?
Well, I mean, I would love to be able to say that I'd love to win a race and stand on the podium, and, you know, firstly it'd be quite funny because I wouldn't be able to get up there, and I'd have to, you know, ask the person that I've beaten to give me a helping hand onto the podium. So that would be one goal. But to be honest, you know, I got a life-changing result at Donington Park in 2023. Really proved that I could do it. It took me a long time to get to that point, and so I feel like I've achieved what I set out to do, which was just drive. I wanted to just drive. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't, you know, wake up and think, I want to be an inspirational character that helps all these people, or that is someone that people can look up to as a role model. I was just like, I want to do something with my life. I don't necessarily want to be in a wheelchair, and that's not saying that it's a negative to people that are. It was my choice that I don't want to be in one. So I'm going to do the work that I can to get out of one, and I would like to race. And that's my plan. That was my goal. And all of a sudden, I've created this career now where, you know, I'm helping people, and I'm doing public speeches, and I'm flying around the world using my voice. So when you say, is there a North Star? Is there something else I want to achieve? I'm actually achieving everything I set out to do, like right now. I'm just trying to sustain it, and try and do the best job I can with the situation that I have, with the platform that I have, and try and help as many people at the same time, and whilst evolving as a human.
I love that. There's an element of mental fitness that clearly you know are giving off. You can feel the vibe off you, and then the physical side of things, you have to keep yourself physically fit. So with your disability, how much of the training can you know, and I'm sort of bring that into the kind of almost the driver controls from the car you're driving.
Yeah.
What do you do to keep fit, and what is that sort of morning routine, and kind of what works for you?
Yeah, so obviously the first thing I have to do is keep my disability in check. You know, my pelvis gets tight. You know, I pop ribs like no tomorrow. You know, my neck, I struggle with my neck and just general movement. When I first started training, you know, leg press was absolutely everything. Trying to build the pressure, the leg strength that you need to hit the brake pedal, you know, effectively and get good pressure. When I first started training, I could only push like 10 kilos with both of my legs, and I needed to get to like 100 kilos with one. So I remember just training hard and pushing, 3 hours a day. I was in this gym, and yeah, I got to a point I could push 130 kilos with my left leg, and actually, fortunately, I've been able to keep that up, right? And so
That's a consistent discipline.
it's a consistent thing, and I don't go in the gym all the time and really focus on trying to build more and build more and build more. I try to consolidate, and I realized that I don't have to be in the gym also to work out, because actually just walking around in London and doing what I do is a workout in itself, and my basic fitness is really, really strong. My legs are really fit and strong, but just actually working on the pelvic muscles and trying to keep everything in place is the biggest challenge, because also you're getting older, and as I'm getting older, the disability is sort of getting worse in certain areas of movement. So it also got to a point, the more I pushed on a leg press, the more it affected my pelvis in a negative way. And so swimming is very important now, because it's weightless and it doesn't affect the body in any way, but it also keeps me fit and strong, and just continue walking as much as I can, and then the odd leg press and whatever. But I have everything I need, and I feel strong enough to, do the races that I need to do.
And talk to me about the modifications to your car coming up at the weekend. What's
Yep.
needed to be changed? So there's things you can do, and then there's
Mhm.
things you can't. What's the modification?
Main thing is I can't flex my ankles. My ankles are pretty fixed in one position, and a lot of or all able-bodied drivers, they brace their heels on the floor of the car, and they accelerate using their ankles, and they brake using their ankles. So I can't do that. So all of the control and the power comes from the thigh muscle itself. So that means I have to have a leg bend in my knee. So my pedals are like double the width of normal pedals. So the brake pedal is double the width, and my accelerator pedal is double the width. And then I have a hand clutch instead of a foot clutch. And that's it, pretty much. But it sounds really simple, but it's super complicated. It takes me about 12.5 hours to do a seat fit. When I do a new seat and I do my modifications and stuff, it takes me a long time, because I actually have to pick my leg up and drag it from side to side to use the pedals, and it affects the way I steer and turn, and loads of detail. But it can be a bit of a pain in the bum.
That's fascinating. Got a question for you specifically on almost like the sort of direction of motorsport, specifically Formula One.
Mhm.
I want to bring it back to when we were watching it as fans, enjoying watching it. And this is, of course, pre-Lewis, and then actually him being part of the history of the sport now in the most incredible way. But it was always a sport. And my point being that in the infamous kind of championship clincher with Max Verstappen, that for me has had so much that wasn't sporting. And the point about this part of the conversation is that in that moment, I'm a fan. I'm watching it. You were probably there. I'm watching it on the TV. I'm out of my seat with kind of, how's this happening? What's going on? The cameras are on Lewis, and your dad goes up to him and has a conversation. And within seconds, he's shaking Max's hand. And I'm kind of having a whole moment. Well, this is incredible. I wouldn't be doing that. And I'm quite a calm person. And whether you were a Lewis fan or not, bringing it back to the healthy kind of sport element of it, there's Drive to Survive that's kind of brought more of an entertainment element to it. And I just wondered, because you're really close to it, one, I'd love to know if you know what was said then, because that echoed around the world of like, wow, values. I mean, and whatever your opinion is of what happened, how Lewis dealt with that. And of course, that's very much something that seems to come from a family point of view. Has the sport changed? And, do you know what was said in that moment as well?
No, I I don't know what was said in that moment, but I know my dad well, and I know Lewis well, and I know my dad would be, Lewis wears his heart on his sleeve, and you can see that, from any interviews that he does. He doesn't blame anybody, he blames himself most of the time, which we do as a family. And I think that's because we are humble and we stay honest. I guess my dad would have said, people know that you won that race. People
Deserved
know
it.
that you deserved it. People know that was an 8th world title, and it wasn't meant to be, but hold your head high, be humble in defeat, you know, it wasn't Max's fault, you know, that decision was made. Max just drove the car, you know, so I think my dad would have supported Lewis in that way, where he would have picked himself up and, you know, done the right thing, which he did.
It was powerful to watch.
Yeah, and you know, it didn't surprise me at all. You know, that's what we've been brought up to be like, you know, from day one. My dad always taught Lewis to do his talking on the track, you know, um, be almost merciless on the track and be arrogant on the track, but when you're in front of people, be honest, be kind, be decent, and you know, we've kept that all the way through. But I think as a sport, yeah, okay, you know, Formula One is the most popular it's ever been, but from my personal perspective, it's lost its way, it's lost its authenticity, and it's become more of a show than a sport from my perspective. And it's great that we have, you know, 300,000 fans a weekend or whatever, but I feel like the rawness and the reason why most of the people you see on the grid now, why they got up in the morning and started racing in the first place, I feel like that's completely gone and disappeared in Formula One.
I echo that. What's your favourite year or era? So if you could race in any era of Formula One, is there one that you just go, I'd want to race then?
I would go to like 2008, when Lewis won his first world title. I think, you know, the cars were great and the championship was in a really good place. It was raw, and you know, even back into the 90s, you know, you could say you would race in those, but you know,
I thought you'd say that. I thought you'd go.
What,
I don't
back
know
in the
why. I just
90s?
thought you might have gone to the sort of late 80s, 90s with the Senna sort of
Yeah,
Marlboro
of course.
McLarens.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would say that, and that's, you know, because those eras were so great, but also, you know, 2008 to 2007, 2008 were really good years, I think, for the sport as well, because technology was starting to come in, but the rawness of the motorsport and the cars were the same, which was great. And you know, you were really seeing drivers being able to overtake and dive bomb each other, which is what you learn as a kid from go-karting and all that sort of stuff. But now everything seems to have completely changed, unfortunately. And yeah, so it's really sad to see. And I know these guys, they're on the track and they're risking their lives out there, and it's hard work, you know. But as a spectacle, I think, you know, Formula One's lost its way slightly.
It's become a spectacle, I think.
Yeah.
But very much wanting to end on a positive, because that's
Sure.
really frustrating to me, actually. But the kind of role model element, you know, we're talking about the greats of the sport, if you like, going back to different times when you'd love to race, and again, role models being so important. I hope you feel that that's very much what you've become in context of, and I think I wondered if you've had that sort of almost mentoring scenario that you feel now through people that, dare I say, didn't think they could get out of a wheelchair, didn't think they could do something, they now can. And do those people approach you, and do you try and help them in their journey to try and be competing with you on the grid?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have to be very careful with my messaging. And my messaging isn't, if you're in a wheelchair, you can get out of it and race a touring car, for example. Um, I think what I'm trying to say in my whole career with my messaging is, regardless of whether you're disabled or able-bodied, you should try and live your life to the edges of your own personal abilities, and maximize your opportunity physically if you can, you know, both able-bodied people and disabled people. You know, I don't class myself as a role model. You know, I'm just a normal standard bloke, you know, just living his life like everybody else is. For some reason, you know, I'm now seen as, you know, someone that people can find inspiration from, but really that wasn't my goal, that wasn't my plan. I just wanted to race cars and try and find a career as a disabled person, because it's hard to find a career as a disabled person in normal society. I think it's great that people, you know, find me inspiring, and you know, I've always got time for people to come to me. You know, but it's I don't want people to say, I want to be like Nick Hamilton, I want to race cars, or I want to do this, I want to do that. I would rather people say, I want to be the best version of myself. Because you can only win at your own life. You can't win at other people's lives. And so my messaging is to try and get people to maximize their life.
It's brilliant. And you are inspiring.
Thank you.
And you articulate that beautifully. You're absolutely right. Being the best version of you in the moment, but striving to be better. You know, there are things you've done that are extraordinary.
Thank you.
And I guess the point is that you can't assume or expect that anyone else could do that. But for that reason, I'm 100% going to call you inspiring.
Thank
you for making time to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
I look forward to it, and I'd love to. I hope you have.
Absolutely. It's been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.